I'm Jen Taylor Skinner, and this is the Electorette. On this episode, I have a conversation with Representative Veronica Escobar of Texas. We discuss the Democratic National Convention and the historic nature of Kamala Harris's nomination for vice president. We also talk about how the country has a crisis of both gun violence and an epidemic of hate. Lastly, we discuss how an incoming Democratic administration can repair the harm done to families torn apart by the current administration's family separation policy. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Representative Veronica Escobar. Representative Escobar, welcome. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
I really want to talk about the convention because we're on, I think, the final night. And I have been personally really impressed with the amount of excitement and the energy that they've been able to garner, through a virtual convention. And I was just wondering how you feel about that. How does it feel different to you in comparison to other conventions?
So I have never been to a convention. Actually, you know what? I take that back. When I was in college, I went to a Republican convention in protest. And so I can't say I've never been to one, but I've truly never been a part, a delegate. I've never been part of all the activities that come with being a delegate. So this would have been my first one. And I will tell you, I was sharing this with someone earlier. In many respects, even though we're not all in the same room together, and even though we're, watching from home, socially isolating, it feels like we are together. And a big part of that is social media and the fact that, we're all texting each other. We haven't been able to contain the excitement. And also, in many respects, what is so cool about the virtual convention is that it's the great equalizer. That, there's a lot of folks who would have loved to have participated in a convention who've never been able to do it. Either, they can't afford it, or they're not a delegate, or for whatever reason. And in some respects, making it virtual makes it completely available to everybody equally.
No, you're absolutely right. That's an excellent point. And I was thinking about that too. And I was also thinking about the fact that, I've never been to one, obviously. But just, I follow them online and I follow them, over the years. And I feel like there's a difference in that, virtual or not virtual, kind of the centering of, I think, social justice. We just saw a lot of that for the past, few nights. And, people of color and all of those kind of issues that I don't think that we centered as much before. And that was kind of the big difference for me.
Yeah, I totally agree. The fact that yesterday we were in the living room of an undocumented immigrant with her dreamer daughter who has spina bifida, and her American citizen daughter who, has 2 children and is going to vote in this election, that we were sitting in her living room with her and with them, with the whole family, was just so powerful. There were many moments where I told a friend of mine where as we were texting back and forth, and she would write, "I'm getting weepy." And I'd say, "Me too, I'm getting weepy too." And, there were a number of those moments, like the in memoriam on the first night, showing the photos of and the names of all of the Americans who've died because of coronavirus. I mean, there are so many moments where I couldn't contain myself. And a big part of it is we're all so emotionally drained from the last 4 years. There's been so much trauma, especially in my own community. There's been so much pain. It's been challenging to find sustained moments of hope over the last 4 years. And so to have 4 nights of that, oh my God, we needed that so badly.
No, you're right. You hit the nail on the head. There's trauma, there's a sense of urgency, and there's this kind of collective community around, can we feel hopeful again? I think that's where the emotions and tears are coming from. Because I heard that I've had those texts too, I'm crying, I can't stop crying.
I
know. I mean, I guess, I don't know. It's a good thing. It's a bad thing.
And I hope it's a good thing. I hope, that people who've never been to the ballot box before now fully understand the impact that bad leadership and corruption and self-dealing, all the things, lawlessness, everything that we've seen from the Trump administration, cruelty, absolute abject cruelty. People who maybe have never voted before, or didn't think that their vote counted or mattered. I really hope that this spoke to them.
Yeah. Yeah. We can't, stop talking about the convention until we talk about the historic nature of Kamala Harris's nomination to take in the VP spot. Not to take anything away from Joe Biden, but I think there's something about the pairing of those two. There's something about them. Like she injected this like a jolt of lightning. And I remember when the numbers came out after she joined the campaign, something like within 2 days, she raised $1 million an hour. Not she personally, but just the addition of her onto the campaign. And I think the two of them together are really electric.
I do too, and she, the idea that a woman of color is on the ticket and could and hopefully will be elected at the national level it is so inspiring. I will tell you, just talking about it gives me goosebumps. And, I'm a big believer in when you can see it, you can be it. And I think about the power of her face on TV and her face on advertisements, the power of that to brown little girls everywhere, brown and black little girls everywhere, and just the fact that they're going to see someone who for so long, really since the inception of our country, has never truly been represented. A woman of color with that kind of power. I can't even put full sentences together. That's how
No, I know. I get choked up about it too, because I was just thinking about that just earlier. I was like, not only is she a woman of color, but she checks so many boxes. She's a woman of color. She's a Black American, Indian American. Her parents were immigrants, They were activists, right? She just checks so many boxes, and so many people can see their lives reflected in her story.
Right. And, I felt that way about virtually all of the women of color who were considered nominees, and all of the women in general. Each one, there was something inspiring, something to be super excited about. And it goes to the kind of bench that women have developed. And, the fact that there's been so much courage among so many women to combat the obstacles that it takes for women, and especially women of color, to be in elected office and to even be considered for that role. It's just all, it's wonderful because we've come so far. It's a reminder that we haven't gone far enough. And it's inspiration for how much further we know we need to keep pushing. So it just, on so many levels, she was the perfect selection.
Yeah. So, when you cast your ballots, your votes for Biden at the convention, you mentioned gun violence, right? And, what happened in your community. I think it was maybe just a year ago, a little over a year ago, a mass shooting driven by hate, racism, xenophobia. Has that changed the urgency for the need for, a new gun policy, stronger gun policy in your...
there's a sense of urgency around all of it, around gun violence, around racism, around xenophobia, around hate, around division. When my community was attacked, and when we learned on the same day of the attack that the domestic terrorist had confessed to driving more than 600 miles, more than 10 hours, to get here in order to slaughter Mexicans and immigrants, that day, I said to the members of the media who talked to me that afternoon that we were at the crossroads of America's gun violence epidemic and our hate epidemic. And we are a country that is in such deep crisis. And we are a country that's in deep pain. And that pain was compounded, over and over again with so many different crises, with the brutality of George Floyd's murder, with the disproportionate damage and the infliction of death upon minority communities by COVID-19, and by an administration that doesn't really care about human life. We are at a moment, and I feel like my community's been at the center of that moment, where we just cannot shoulder any more of this burden. And we we have to relieve ourselves of the burden of hate, of the burden of gun violence, of the burden of division, of the burden of racism, of the burden of division. And one election will not do it. We're not going to eradicate racism overnight. We're not going to, even if we enact all of our gun laws, we're not going to end domestic terrorism. But we have to take important steps in the direction of solving these huge problems. And the November 3rd will be a huge step, in dealing with the climate crisis and so many other things. But, and if we don't win on November 3rd, I really am worried about whether we will even have a republic or a democracy after these next 4 years.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, that I think was the undercurrent, I think, of Obama's address at the convention, and everyone kind of feels the same way, right? And a hate epidemic, that is the perfect phrase, as the most apt phrase to describe what's happening right now. And it's just heartbreaking. And you're right, it's absolutely not sustainable. And it won't happen within, one administration or even 2 terms, I think, because it's taken so long for us to get here. But at the very least, we can take away these tools that they use to enact their hate, right? Which, brings me to, Biden's gun, violence policy, or his gun policy.
Right. Absolutely. And, here's the thing that is so baffling. Well, and maybe it's not so baffling. Maybe I'm being too Pollyanna about this, but, the gun violence prevention legislation is not controversial. When you look at the polling among not just Democrats, not just Republicans, but among gun owners as well, there is widespread support for things like universal background checks, widespread support for closing loopholes. But the NRA has had an iron grip on Republicans for so long that they are afraid of, they feel like they've got to ask permission to sneeze when it comes to the NRA. It is just unbelievable, the kind of power and control the NRA has over some of my Republican colleagues, most of them, and certainly over Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell. One of the things that was so offensive, immediately after the El Paso shooting, the governor of my state claimed he wanted to take swift action. I knew it was all talk. Sure enough, it was all talk, because after only a matter of time, the NRA knocks on their door and tells them to stand down, and they do. Just a couple weeks after the shooting in El Paso, John Cornyn took a big check from the NRA. It is so morally repugnant. I mean, these folks are not public servants. They are soldiers for the NRA. That's who they are. That's all they will ever be.
It's amazing to think about that people are not moved by lives being lost, right? They're moved by paychecks. Just an aside, just thinking about that, the way that you put it. But thank God for Moms Demand Action and other activists. And, I think the NRA, they're starting to crumble a bit, right? Let's hope.
Yeah, they're starting to crumble under the weight of their corruption. I mean, that really is ultimately what's happening is, it's become a criminal enterprise, essentially, for self-dealing, for self-enrichment. In many ways, that the Trump administration and the Trump family are a criminal enterprise.
I don't think we talk enough about what happened with Biden in the mid-90s in relation to this, because I had even forgotten that, as senator, he secured a ban on assault weapons and high capacity magazines,
Right.
But there's a 10-year expiration. So it's not in place right now. And I know that's one of the things in his current gun policy plan. He has some other things there. And I read the other day that it's the most extensive gun policy proposal we've seen in a while. I don't know what you think about it, if you think it, goes far enough, or what else can we add to it, or how will it help your community?
I'm a huge supporter, and as you mentioned, a really ambitious gun violence prevention platform. I think there's more that we can do, especially around hate crimes and domestic terrorism. And it's a great platform. One of the things that I want Americans to understand, folks who buy into the idea that somehow those of us who support the kind of platform that Joe Biden has put forward, that we're, out to eradicate the Second Amendment, and it makes it so that, that the paranoia around it makes it so that there can't even be a debate among, rational people about it. But I've spoken with folks and I've described to them, for example, the AK-47 that the domestic terrorist who attacked us used. Those bullets were not meant to go through a body. They were meant to destroy a body. And so, those bullets, as they went through the bodies of these innocent victims, essentially shattered bone, shattered muscle, and shattered nerve endings. Each one of these victims who survived and who was shot will suffer from lifelong problems. I just, around the August 3rd 1 year anniversary, I was calling some of the families, and one of the victims was describing to me the pain in his leg that is followed by numbness, that is followed by pain. So when he is able to feel his leg, all he feels is incredible pain. And when he doesn't feel the pain, he can't feel his leg. And it's because of the nerve endings that have been completely obliterated. He was going to have to go into another surgery 1 year later, more physical therapy, probably additional surgeries going forward. These bullets and these guns don't just kill, they completely destroy lives. They completely destroy people's futures. There's absolutely no reason to have some of these weapons of war in our neighborhoods. No reason. And we can't even have that debate or discussion, because the minute you bring it up, there's all sorts of alarmists saying you're trying to do away with the Second Amendment. When the Second Amendment has in so many ways been completely perverted by the NRA.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But one of the things that I found in his policy, which I was really kind of shocked and not really shocked, that's the wrong word, but excited by, because I haven't really heard anyone talk about this. But he also not only wants to reinstate the ban on assault weapons and high capacity magazines, but he wants some sort of buyback program, which,
right.
No one's talked about that.
Exactly. And, and I will tell you that these are, again, really common sense pieces of public policy that help make communities safer, and I will tell you, it takes tremendous, I mentioned earlier that the common sense gun violence prevention legislation is widely popular, non-controversial, but there are components of the vice president's platform that could be seen as controversial by folks. And it takes courage. It takes incredible courage to say, we've got to be ambitious when it comes to protecting our families. And in my view, his policies, like the gun buyback program, which in many respects, there are many communities that want to do that. And local governments are able to do that, but they don't have the funds, right? And so this is bringing the weight of the federal government behind those kinds of programs so that we can give communities the tools to institute these. There's so much work that we have to do. And, I think that it takes courage, not just to recognize that we need a change, but it takes courage to propose bold, sweeping change.
Yeah. There's more I can say on that, because I think that specific program has been categorized as something that's really, really too far, like a bridge too far, right? And it isn't really.
It's crazy. It's crazy to me because, we also have to recognize that there's an evolution of thought on some of these things. And so, for example, one of the victims of the August 3rd shooting, as I was sitting with her in the waiting room, while her husband was in surgery, she said to me, "We have an AK-47 at home. We bought it and it only took us 15 minutes. And she said, I don't want it anymore." So there are people whose views about their own weapons have changed and evolved. Why not create a program where they can surrender those weapons, where essentially we're saying, we're going to buy it back from you? That is such an important component in public policy, that we realize that there's change, that there's evolution, and you've got to use, not just government for enforcement, but you've also got to use government for incentives as well. And I think his public policy recognizes that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's an incredible story. You mentioned the cruelty of the administration, right? Especially in relation to the border policies, immigration policies, asylum seekers. I mean, I always come back to this because it was so apparent, I think, during the 2016 election cycle that he was a cruel person. Right. It was just so obvious. But I think that it was almost cartoonish. Right. And I think that some people just did not believe that he would go that far. But I think it's far worse than anyone could have imagined, maybe in relation to this, right? Especially the border policies. And I know that, Biden has an extensive immigration reform plan, right? And we've talked about ending a lot of those harmful policies like child separation and family separation, but I have not to date heard any solutions about how do we recover and restore those families and repair the harm that we've done.
Yeah, no, and I was very fortunate to participate with some incredible, brilliant, wonderful people on an immigration unity task force that was made up of Senator Sanders supporters and the vice president's supporters, so that we could come together on various topics, including immigration, and talk through what we needed to do as a country. And we presented our ideas to the vice president, who is incorporating those ideas into his platform. But among those ideas is the recognition that we have an obligation as a country, not just an obligation, in terms of an immigration system, but a moral obligation to find every last separated family, every last child who was literally orphaned by this administration. Because as we know, number one, the family separation policy actually began, El Paso was the testing ground, and it began before the general public in our country knew that it was happening. So before journalists started writing about it, there were already thousands of families impacted. So, I shared that in particular with the vice president when he and I had a conversation as he was seeking my endorsement. And he is absolutely committed to reuniting every last family member. We will have to put the full weight of the federal government behind that effort, because as we've learned, and we keep learning, not only was there never a plan for reunification, but there really wasn't a desire for reunification. And so the harm has been generational. We've hurt 2 generations of immigrants, the parents and their children. We've caused irreparable harm. The very least we could do as a government is ensure that every single one of those families comes back together. And believe me, I will hold, every member of the administration to that promise, but I don't think I will need to do that, because there's a recognition that we have to do that.
Wow. Yeah. So that does give me some comfort that you're focused on this and that the administration is focused on this, at least the incoming administration.
Right.
As a mother, that
is only interested in cruelty, unfortunately.
Exactly. So I want to make that clear. The incoming administration that we will vote in starting in November.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much, Representative Escobar. Thank you so much for your leadership and for everything.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. And thanks for your tremendous program.